Hindu Dharma and science. It is one of those interesting questions where people often tend to take a very strong stand on what they believe. When you do a quick internet search, you find several arguments showing that Sanatana Dharma is much more superior than the modern science. And at the same time, you see a different school of thought going around claiming that Sanatana Dharma and science are mutually exclusive and are not related, where Sanatana Dharma is a belief system and modern science is a much more practical and reliable way. I don't want to go into this particular debate, but I just wanted to express my thought on how I see is Hindu Dharma and modern science, if they comply with each other or they are mutually exclusive. So I want to review this question in three parts. One, how do you see and understand the science? And how do you see and understand Hinduism? And then finally, how do you try to understand based on the evidences of what you see around? So to address what is science, whenever you hear word science, you often hear the word called the modern science. What is it? Why do we have to specify something as modern science and distinguish it from the science otherwise? The reason is, when you carefully understand the European history, you do have several celebrated scientists before the modern science era, like Aristophanes, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Archimedes, Plato. So these are all celebrated scientists of their time, and we often read about them in the history. But there is a key problem in the European history science during that time. So back in the days before modern science era, which started around 16th, 17th century, most of the science is controlled either by the kings and the empires or the churches. For example, Aristotle is the teacher of Alexander, and then he is heavily respected and celebrated not only during his time but for next 1500 years. So because the scientific community is heavily restricted and controlled by kings and the church, there is no freedom of thought. For example, Aristotle, with all his credits, he was right in many cases. But then when he claimed that men and women have different number of teeth in their mouth, like men has more teeth than women, you are not allowed to question it and then say he is wrong for next 1500 years. Because you cannot do a scientific research and then come up with something that opposes Aristotle. So there is this celebratory method in European scientific history where you're not allowed to question what is already being told by some celebrated figure. The same thing goes with the church, right? As a scientist, you cannot come up with some kind of claims that goes against the belief system of the church. So there was this restriction, which is why when you hear stories of Riccardo Bruni, who was burnt alive for saying there are multiple solar systems in the universe, it doesn't agree with the church, and then he was burnt alive. And when Galileo himself tried to prove some of the Aristotle principles to be false, he was house arrested and was never allowed to publish his research. So we keep hearing these stories, but luckily around 16th to 17th century, this whole system was changed. Scientific research came out of kingdoms and the churches to a neutral place of universities, which are often publicly funded and which has its own monotonous nature of research. So what this allowed people to ask questions freely, which were forced to be believed for centuries. And then suddenly you have scientists like Newton, Huygens, and all the European modern scientists that you hear. So they were operating in a completely free environment where they don't have restrictions from either of churches or the kingdoms. So historians believed this is the key change that happened in the European history of science that completely transformed the scientific nature of our life. Hence, they coined the word called modern science, the era in the science where anyone can freely question the status quo. And people, like Rabindranath Tagore said, where the mind is without fear and head is held high, and where knowledge is free. So that kind of freedom of knowledge is suddenly made available in European history around that 17th century. And then there was a sudden rise of universities, and then sudden rise of independent research. And then fast forward it for 500 years. Now we see how much it has transformed the entire planet, all because of one key change in the scientific methodology, where you are free to question, reason without any restrictions. So that's the difference between science and modern science. And please note that modern science is only 500 years old, and then we have started from almost nothing to all the wisdom and all the scientific advancements and engineering that you see today. Everything changed when you just made the reasoning free. Now you try to understand Hinduism. There are, of course, it's impossible to consolidate what is Hinduism, but for this discussion, I only want to focus on how do you understand the scientific nature of Hinduism. If you understand Hinduism, questioning is something that is heavily celebrated. I don't see in any other ancient civilizations where you can literally question anything, and that's not only encouraged but also celebrated. For example, you see Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna himself in his Viswarupa Avatara was trying to tell something to Arjuna, he just didn't listen and then say like, okay, because God is telling me this, I have to do it. No, he always have the freedom to question the God until he gets the answer what he wants. That, as a scientist, I see a perfect scientific methodology, a methodology that Europe has adopted during the starting of 17th century. So you are free to question. You have no restriction. Even when the God tells you something, you have right to question. And then right is not only encouraged but celebrated and documented. So you already have the system in place where people are not restricted to what they believe, but always encouraged to explore beyond what you know. So when we have Vedas, right? If you study Hinduism, you have Vedas which are Sanatana. Nobody knows how old are they, and then everyone agrees that they are the ultimatum for Hinduism. You believe in Vedas, and then that's where the Hinduism starts. So when Vedas have all the knowledge and all the things that you needed, and it's already given to you, why do you think we have all the supplementary knowledge around it, like Upanishads, like Puranas, like debates, like school of thoughts coming out of it? The reason why we have all these things beyond Vedic knowledge is because humans were allowed to question Veda, allowed to interpret Vedas in the way they see it. And this is exactly what, as a scientist, I feel is happening in the modern scientific methodology. So you could question the Veda itself, and instead of restricting you, they document it, and then they ask you to study it. That's essentially what Upanishads are. Most of the Upanishads are the questions coming out of Veda, and then it may be a student asking a teacher, or a son asking the father, or a kid asking Yamadharmaraja about all these questions. So the process of knowing the knowledge was given higher importance than the mere gospel of knowledge. So that process is something that as a scientist, I get interested when I study stories from the Hinduism. So this is a civilization that encourages the process, which is exactly what I study as a modern scientist. Whenever I go in the lab or whenever I do my own research, it is the same methodology of reasoning something that I follow, and then at that point I see no difference between the way the Sanatana Dharma exhibits itself to the modern scientific methodology. So I'm not going into the results, I'm going back to the process. That's where both of them are in singularity. And now the question is, if If Sanatana Dharma has the same methodology as the modern science, where are all these advancements? Well, just imagine within 400 years of modern scientific methodology, if we could achieve what we achieve today, just imagine what could we achieve if the same thing goes for several thousands of years. So that's what the Sanatana Dharma gave us. When we see some of the stories in Sanatana Dharma, which are beyond imaginations, it's all about, when we have to put it in the modern language, you see a constant communication with alien civilizations. So some of the technologies that we cannot even foresee, maybe they are just a pulp fiction, art of imagination, or maybe there is some level of truth to it that you cannot understand. So I'm not concluding something, I'm just giving a benefit of doubt, because I know the Sanatana Dharma has a methodology which is as robust as modern methodology, if not better. And then we have enough time to progress in that process to achieve all the scientific advancements. And we do see evidence. We do see evidence in our engineering structures. If we study a old construction, old temple construction, or old metallurgical research, or the materials that were used to construct some ancient constructions, we do see evidence at every corner of the country. So that is something that intrigues me. So first I have a benefit of doubt. First I have initially have a confidence on some system which allowed you to reason, and you allowed you to research instead of sticking on to something which was told before you. So we have that civilization which allowed you to research, and then you have several evidences which came as an output of it. So I have both benefit of doubt and I have a partial reason. But I know I will come to the question, where is all the knowledge today? So it could always be a pulp fiction that may not be true, or it could be something that could be true, but how do you pin down, how do you understand this point? So let's march into the third question on how do you understand where we stand today. I will give an example that you can correlate. Back in 1960s, late 1960s, about 50 years ago, NASA has sent people to the moon and they brought back safe, right? And they did it on a regular basis from during Apollo missions from 1968 to mid 70s. They could easily send people to the moon and then bring them back. And 50 years later, today as we speak, NASA has started a new mission to send people to the moon called Artemis, and we cannot use any technology used in Apollo into the Artemis. So we could send people to the moon 50 years back, and for 50 years we did not pursue the technology anymore. We have different interests. We fired the people. We stopped the whole project. I live in the same city where the whole Apollo mission started. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. That's exactly place where a whole Apollo mission started, and then they got fired after the project. So for 50 years we did not pursue the technology. And then today when we have to do Artemis again, we cannot use any knowledge from Apollo. We need to start from scratch. We can't even use notebooks and then refer on how we did for the Apollo mission. I can go into the scientific reason why we cannot do that. It's not because we don't understand it. It's impossible to go back and then look in some technology 50 years back and then make use of it. All we know today is we send people back, people to the moon 50 years ago, and then to do it again after 50 years with a break in between, we have to restart the whole research altogether. This is very common if you are in any scientific or technological, even in a company, when you don't work on a technology for maybe 1 or 2 years, and when you have to restart it, you have no idea how it goes. So this is the harsh reality on continuity of science. You have to do it continuously, otherwise you lose the track. So now you see on your very clearly that even in the modern era, with all the information available, if you don't pursue a technology for just 50 years, you completely lose it. And And now we have a civilization which was sidetracked for several political and anthropological reasons, which lost track for a while. For thousands of years, we were under foreign invasions. Our universities were burned. Our education system was attacked. Our scholars were killed. Yes, I mean, there are unfortunate parts of the history, but scientifically speaking, these are all enough to completely destroy the knowledge, and then to a level where we cannot even understand how certain things are done. Similar to how we cannot know how Apollo is done today. We have to restart the whole process again today, and in just span of 50 years, and then now you have thousands of years of gap. And it won't surprise me when someone say like, we had all the technology but we cannot use any of it today because we lost track in thousands of years. Well, that's perfectly justified. Again, I'm not concluding that we have all the technology that was claimed, but as a scientist, I give a strong benefit of doubt about what is possible, what was possible, what are the things that we are able to do back in the day. So all it gives me was a huge respect. And when I have to study Hinduism now, I don't just study it as a religion, or as some old scriptures. I try to extract some lifestyle in it, which I can use it in my modern day life. So I know I did not give a some concluding answer whether they both is whether Hinduism is superior to modern science. No, I want to go back to the roots and then try to understand Hinduism and then how its methodology rather than results are linked to the modern science. Thank you.